So it's lesson 10, part 2. We've set up our checkout page. And now we need to dive into online payment. So whenever we're doing online payment, which is a common task for web developers, it's largely up to us to do the integration. So one of the things that we're always going to need is we can't just process credit card transactions ourselves. We need to use some kind of online payment service, typically known as a payment gateway. Yep, sure, Alex, absolutely. It's definitely possible to do it. Oh, sorry, is it possible? Yeah, you would do it similar to the query that we did here. So you could actually fetch the items and do the math at once without a loop. You should be able to adapt that code for that purpose. So if we want to integrate online payment, we need to get a third-party service that will authorize credit cards and actually process the charges. It's also better that we use a service for this because there's a lot of liability and security involved in actually doing the credit card transactions. So we don't really want to be responsible for taking the numbers, storing the credit cards on our own site in our own database. That leaves us with a whole host of pretty significant legal and security requirements. So better to let one of the gateway services take care of this. So there's lots of payment gateways. Here's a list of some of them rated. So this site rates PayPal as the best. Obviously, probably most people are familiar with PayPal. One of the downsides of PayPal is most customers need an account to use PayPal, and not everyone has a PayPal account. So that might prevent some users from completing a checkout in an online site. We're going to use Stripe. You've probably heard of some of these other services like Authorize.net. Now, these gateways, they do also, they're not free, they're not charities, so they will typically take a percentage of your fees. So your customer has to keep that in mind, that they're going to have to give a fee to their payment gateway. They're going to lose part of their transaction. But it's going to be our job as developers to help the customers set these things up. So we've already set up, I've asked you all to set up Stripe, so we can go now to the Stripe dashboard, which is simply dashboard.stripe.com. So let's log in here. Now, the first thing we'll need to do here, I've already done this. You'll need to create an account in here. So you can just click on the new account button here, and you can give it a name. You can call it Global Grub if you want. You can call it COMP2084. The name doesn't really matter. So go ahead and just create the store. And then we've got this link over on the right that says developers. So Stripe gives us a sandbox we can send through test transactions without actually having to provide a real credit card number. So if you click on developers, then brings you to the developer portal. Actually, and where we want to go is into the API keys section. So Stripe provides 2 keys. It's kind of neat the way they do this, though. It tells us, because we're in test mode, it gives us a publishable key and a secret key, but they both include the word test. So if we use these keys, Stripe isn't actually going to charge anybody's card. To activate our store, we would have to change it from test mode, and then it would generate a set of live keys that will not include the word test. So we do our testing with the test keys. When our store is ready to go live, we change the mode to production. You shouldn't have to put in your SIN, I wouldn't think, Alex. I don't think I've provided mine. So provide them as little info as you need to. It should be in developer mode by default. You shouldn't have to do anything. It should automatically be in developer mode. Okay, normally what I do, so I will test, put through lots of transactions and make sure everything is working. When I'm ready to put my store live, I will go into live mode, but then I also want to test with my live keys. So what I typically do is create a product that costs 1 cent. So I can put through some transactions and make sure that the actual production keys are working. So I'll just charge my credit card 1 cent while I'm testing it. Okay, so now we need to go. Right. Thanks, Attila. Yeah, we don't need to make it active now. We want to leave it in test mode, in development mode. So let's copy our keys. First, I'm going to click my publishable key. And now we need to go to our app settings file and we need to add a Stripe section here. So down at the bottom, after our authentication section, I'm going to add a Stripe section with 2 values. The publishable key, which I'll paste in. So it starts with PK_test. We may not even need this value anymore. In the older version of their API, we needed it. I think in the newer version, I'm not even sure. We may not even actually have to use the publishable key. And then we'll have our secret key, which I'm also going to go and get from the dashboard. So the secret key, it doesn't show, but there's a link here. It says reveal test key. I'll click it. Will ask me to confirm my password. And then I can copy it and hide it again. So I can paste it in. As I said, I'm not entirely sure we actually are going to need the publishable key. So we'll need these values shortly, but not quite yet. Okay, let's go back to our shop controller now, and let's start working on. We're redirecting to payment, so we need a get method here. Like our checkout methods, it will require authentication. We're going to try this without the publishable key. We may be able to just ignore it. So we're just going to return a view. And then we will generate an empty view called payment. So I'll just right click, add the view. I'll choose Razor View Empty. So I just have a blank view and set the title. Payment. And then the code we need for this page, there's not much of it. We can actually get the code from the Stripe API docs. I'll maybe just add an H1 tag here. Let's say continue to payment. So I've included a link, another link on Blackboard to their checkout integration documentation. You can open that. So there's a whole bunch of code samples here. So here's our sample where they've got a little pre-built checkout page. And there's code for 4 different files. You'll notice also at the top here, in this section, we can choose what kind of front end we've got, HTML, React, or Next.js. So we're using an HTML front end. And then they've got different code libraries, different code samples, depending on the back end. So obviously we want to pick HTML as the front end, and we want to pick .NET as the back end. So there's 4 sample files here. There's the server.cs. This will have our server-side code that we can largely copy and paste. If you click on this second tab here, this checkout.html, we're going to copy most but not all of this HTML. We're going to copy some of this into our payment page. The first thing we're going to copy are these 2 JavaScript links on lines 6 and 7. So again, notice I've clicked on the checkout.html, and we want lines 6 and 7, the link to the polyfill JavaScript and the link to Stripe's JavaScript library. So copy those. And we'll just, whoops, didn't want all that stuff. I only wanted those 2 lines. I'm just going to copy those 2 lines only, lines 6 and 7. So I'm going to add those 2 JavaScript links into my file. The only other thing we need here is this little form down on lines 18, 19, 20. Although we're going to make a few little changes to it. So then I'm going to copy those 3 lines. It's just a form with a button. So I'll copy that. But I am going to make a couple of changes here. I'm going to change the action to shop/process payment. Actually, wait, sorry. I'm not going to call it process payment. Shop, create checkout session. I'm going to change my class here so it looks like all our other buttons. And I'm just going to change the text on the button to say next. Now, in the old version of the documentation, we used to have to include the publishable key as well as the amount of the purchase in this form. But in the newer version of the docs, notice it doesn't even include it. Our form, it's really just a button to continue and to invoke this method. So there's the form. It's pretty simple. If we want to try this in the browser and see what it looks like, we just go back, put something back in the cart. So now it looks like this. So when we click this button, we want to then invoke the Stripe payment page. It's not going to work yet, right? It's going to call this method, and this method is going to be needed. So now we're going to create our post method called create checkout session. We may have to add some more stuff here. We'll leave it like this. We may have to come back to it. So we'll go to our shop controller. So we've got a post, shop, create checkout session. No, we only use ASP controller and ASP action for a link. This is a form submission. It's not a link. That is the URL that will process the form submission. Manginger, it's not complete yet, so don't worry about that at this point. We're going to need to write this method first. So we're going to create a Stripe's checkout session. Now, most of the code here, we can again copy from the Stripe documentation, although we're going to have to make a few changes. Okay, Manjinder, off the top of my head, I don't know why that is. You may just have a syntax error here somewhere. So we want to make our call to Stripe, but if we go back and look in the documentation, first thing it says is to set up the server, we need to install the stripe.net library. So we can either do it from the package manager console with that command or through the visual NuGet package manager. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Tools and NuGet package manager. I'm going to manage the NuGet packages for the solution. And I'm going to search for Stripe. And we want this first package that shows up called stripe.net. Okay, this is the official library. So I'm going to click on my project here and install the package. Yep, you can also use the package manager console. If you wanted, you can go to Tools, NuGet package manager, and you could run the command. You actually can copy it right from here if you copy it. So either one of these will work. They do the same thing. So if I hit enter in package manager console or click install here, okay, so it now shows I get a little green checkbox and it says that Stripe is installed. So Manjinder, if it's not working, make sure I would try to build and rebuild your solution. See if there's any syntax errors, any compile errors. Okay, good. So we've installed the package. And then in this server.cs file, if we click back here, there's a bunch of code here. We don't need all of it. We're going to come down here and starting on line 56, where it says var options equals new session create options. I'm going to copy from line 56 all the way down to line 80, to the end of the method. So I'm copying everything in the inside of this create method, starting on line 56. Though we are going to have to make some changes. Hard to highlight everything I need to highlight. I'll just copy what I can see down to the bottom. I'm going to paste it in, and then I'm going to go and copy the rest of it. A little bit messy. So now I'll copy from line 72 down to line 80. Lots of empty blank lines here as well. Not ideal. I'll take out my blank line so my code's more readable. We're going to need to add some references. Okay. So let's start here. First of all, it doesn't know what this session create options namespace is. But if we add a reference to stripe.checkout, that error, most of our errors actually go away. So that's good. This domain variable, they've hard-coded it into their sample. I excluded it. Notice here, they've got the domain hard-coded in. We want our domain to be dynamic, right? When we're running it locally, it should be localhost. If we publish to Azure or Smarter ASP, it should use our live URL. So there's a way around this. We're going to replace this with HTTPS plus request.host. So this could be, this way the domain name is dynamic. And we'll do the same in our cancel URL. So this actually creates the Stripe checkout session. We'll need to add a couple more things here. First of all, this price ID, this is just a placeholder, right? We need to actually figure out how much the order is for. So to do this, probably the easiest way actually would be once we figure out the order total here, we could just store that in a session variable. If we store that in a session variable, we could then just use that and pass it in here. So while we're at it, we'll call set string total right, we'll convert it to a string. Oh, yes. Alex, thank you. That would be easier. Sorry. Good suggestion. Hadn't thought of that. Love having such smart students. So first we'll have to call get object. We'll have to read it out of the session, and then we can get the total. So far, order. So we'll call get object. We've got to cast it. That's an order object. Okay, so we're getting the session variable called order, and we're casting it as an order. So now our price here will be our order dot total. Now, one thing to note about the Stripe checkout, the prices are actually in cents. So if our order total is $19.99, we have to multiply it by 100 to make it $1,999. Now, when we do this, right, we've got a double, so we're going to have to convert it to a string. I'm not exactly sure why it wants the price as a string, but hey, that's what Stripe asks for. We can also actually add a description and the currency. So I'm going to do that. Global grub purchase. So we're just sending the entire purchase through. We're not sending the individual line items. And we'll set the currency to Canadian dollars. Down here at the bottom, after the user pays, we've also got callback URLs, a success and cancel. I want to change these URLs. We're not going to load HTML pages. If the payment is successful, we want to call shop/save order. So if Stripe payment is successful, we want to take the user to a save order method that's going to save the order and all the items. If they cancel the payment, we'll take them back to their cart. Maybe they decide, oh, I don't want to pay yet. I want to remove something. Maybe it's too expensive, or there's something I forgot. So we're going to change those URLs to our own. So success URL is shop save order, cancel URL is shop and cart. Our payment method types, I'm going to change this so that we're only allowing our credit cards. We're not going to take debit cards. This is the price ID. I'm a little... We'll have to try this out. I'm not sure this is quite right. This is going to give us the right value, but we'll try it. The one other thing that we're missing here is we haven't supplied the API key. We can try this right now, but it's probably going to fail because we haven't actually passed our Stripe secret key. Could be, Scott. I'll try it like this, but I expect we are going to get an error back from Stripe if we do this. I'm going to try it, and then I may have to try it with the debugger on. Go back to the cart. Oh, interesting. I added something that's already in there. Okay, we'll deal with that problem later. I want to try to see what happens with payment. Okay, so notice, right? It'll crash because we haven't provided the API key. So this was to be expected. Okay, you may have the wrong reference. If it's not recognizing those, make sure you are referencing stripe.checkout. If it doesn't recognize line items or payment method types, that's suggesting that you may not have the right Stripe reference. You may have picked the other, you may have made the reference to Stripe billing instead of Stripe checkout. So make sure you got the right reference. Okay, I may have to look after. So now we've got a little bit of a trick. In general, most things in ASP.NET work really well. Here's something that's sort of clunky. We need to read the secret key from our appsettings.json. In older versions of .NET, in our controller, we could just use the configuration class and it would allow us to read values from appsettings.json. As of .NET 3.0, they actually got rid of this. There's no way for the controller to read the keys directly, which is not ideal. So what we have to do is we actually have to pass to our controller up here in our constructor. We've got to pass a configuration object as a dependency, kind of a roundabout way for the controller to be able to get into read config values. I don't know why. I'm not exactly sure why they got rid of this ability in .NET 3.0. So what we need to do is declare a dependency in the constructor and then configure that dependency in our startup file. It's kind of a bit of a hacky workaround process, but it's by design in .NET Core that this is what we have to do. So first of all, we'll add config var so we can read vals from Appsettings. So we're going to use an iConfiguration object. So we're going to use this interface, which will require a reference to Microsoft Extensions configuration. We're now going to supply a second dependency to the constructor. Right now, our constructor's got one dependency. Whenever you instantiate our constructor, you have to pass it a database connection. You are also now going to have to pass it a configuration object. So while we can use the database connection everywhere, we also need to be able to reference this configuration variable. So our controller, by making these changes, our controller now requires a configuration dependency. There's one more step in this process. In order to, we now need to pass this when our app starts. We need to create an instance of that dependency. Exactly, Attila. We're using dependency injection. We already used it for the database class, so we're just adding to it. The controller, instead of having one dependency, it now has two. So now we need to go to our startup file, and we need to register this dependency. And I should add a link here. I'm just going to add a link to our docs. Let's see. Just grab it from my Monday class. I meant to add it to Blackboard. Lakehead students use D2L rather than Blackboard, so it looks a little different. Where's my link? Here, setting Azure config variables. I will put this up on Blackboard as well. So if you refresh your lesson 10 folder, it'll take you here. So this explains how to configure settings. This isn't the right article. Whoops, wrong link. Here it is, sorry. I will update that. My apologies. So there's three ways we can do it. Yep. Yeah, my girlfriend's doing her degree at Queen's. They use it. My daughter's at Laurier. They use D2L. It's actually a Canadian company based in Waterloo. They just actually went public. Yep, a lot of people used it. So I get to experience both. So we've got three methods in our startup for registering dependencies. We've got add singleton, add scoped, and add transient. We're going to use add singleton. So let's look at what these three options mean. When we use add singleton, it just registers one instance that's available through the app and every request. This is fine for our purposes, because all we're really using this for is when someone goes to pay and they create a checkout session, we just need to read this key value from appsettings.json. This key value is the same for every user and every request. So we can just register the dependency. It's like a static object. We could use add scope. It makes one instance available per request. So every time we get a new request, it creates a new instance. So this uses more overhead on the server. Add transient is actually a new instance for every controller, every request, and every user. So these are overkill for what we need. All we want to do is read the API key. And it's globally available, so when our app starts, we just want to register that API key, make it globally available. So we can use add singleton. We're never going to use add scoped or add transient in this class, so don't worry about it. So here's our code. Inside of the configure services, we just call services.add singleton, and then we pass whatever dependency it is, which in our case is a configuration object. So we're going to go to startup. And in here, we want to add that So we're adding a dependency so our controllers can read our configuration values. And we're primarily using this so we can read the Stripe keys in the shop controller. So we call add Singleton. So we are passing an iConfiguration object. So this will make our configuration available in any controller that accepts it as a dependency in the constructor. We don't need this in our products controller or our categories controller, so we don't have to modify those. But we need it here so that our shop can access the API key. I mean, the quick and dirty way to avoid this is just hard code the API key values in the controller, but that's not really best practice. The value should go in our app settings. So this is in our startup file down in configure services. So now that we've configured our application and our controller to be able to use this iConfiguration interface, we should be able to read the API key. So we now need one more line of code in our create checkout session so that we can grab the Stripe key and set it. Because we're still going to get this error that we got before, that the Stripe key was not set. So go back to our shop controller. And in our new method, before we create the session, we've got to set the API key. So we're going to set our Stripe configuration. And then we'll use our iConfiguration. And we can read the secret key. Now we get an error here. So we need to reference the core Stripe package. So add the reference to Stripe. So now we solved one problem by adding the reference, but now I've broken something else. Watch, let me just undo that for a moment. Without the reference to Stripe, notice carefully, my order is blue here, referencing our global grub order model, but it doesn't recognize the Stripe configuration. When I add the reference, my Stripe config turns blue and my order goes red. Why? Because the Stripe library also has a class named order. We've got a model class named order as well. So now we've created an ambiguous reference. When we're grabbing our session order, the compiler doesn't know. That's right, Alex. So it says, well, which order class is this? Yeah. We want it to be it's our own order class here. Now it's telling me I've still got an error. So this problem also exists up here now. In our checkout method, we've got the same problem. When we're binding to an order, the reference is ambiguous. So again, this is not a Stripe order class. It's our own custom order. So we'll pick models.order. So now I should be able to build, and I'm going to try the payment again. Okay, we'll deal with this after. This is just because I'm adding an item that's already in the cart. We'll have to fix that up. We'll fix that later. So now I'll go to pay. Okay, we can only specify one. Okay. So I added the currency in, but maybe we'll take the currency out. It says if you provide price, you can't provide currency. Interesting. So I'll try again. Let's start again. Remove a few items from my cart. Yeah, we'll deal with the duplicates later. Okay. Price should be the ID. Okay. All right, I know how we'll fix this. I know, it's a lot. That's when we're working with third-party code and integrating, we're often working with things we don't know very much about, right? We're trying to follow their documentation, but it can be tricky and their documentation isn't always right. So even though we did what they wanted to, what they asked, it wants us to set up the products this way. We're going to modify this. We'll make a few changes here. But to allow Alex's brain to come back together, we will pause here. Okay, it's 5 to 1. Let's take 10 minutes. I'll upload what we've got so far, but we're going to make a couple of little adjustments in here. I will upload to GitHub now. We'll be back at 1:05.